He thought he was throwing away a nobody with a $10,000 tip. He called her dead weight in front of his mistress, never realizing the man sitting silently in the back of the room wasn't a janitor. He was the man who owned the entire skyline. By the time the ink dried on those divorce papers, he hadn't just lost a wife. He had signed away his entire empire. Elena sat quietly at the long polished table, her hands resting gently in her lap. The room smelled of expensive wood and strong coffee, but the tension in the air was heavier than anything else. Across from her sat Marcus, her husband of 2 years. He looked confident, almost proud of himself, like a man who believed he had already won. He adjusted his cufflinks, the gold catching the light, and leaned back in his chair. "Let's be honest, Elena," he said, his voice cold and sharp. "This marriage was a mistake." Elena didn't react. She had heard this tone before. Calm on the outside but filled with arrogance. Marcus continued, "You don't belong in my world. You never did. You're just a waitress. You don't understand business, you don't understand status. And frankly, you embarrass me." From the side of the room, a soft laugh broke the silence. Chloe. She stood leaning against the wall, dressed in a tight designer outfit, her arms crossed as she watched the scene unfold like it was entertainment. She didn't even try to hide her smile. Elena slowly turned her eyes toward her, then back to Marcus. "So this is what this is about?" Elena asked softly. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. Marcus smirked. "This is about reality. I'm about to close one of the biggest deals of my life. Investors, partnerships, media, everything is changing. I can't have someone like you next to me when that happens." "Someone like me?" Elena repeated. "Yes," he said firmly. "Simple. Ordinary. Replaceable." Those words hung in the air. For a brief second, something flickered in Elena's eyes, but it disappeared just as quickly. She folded her hands together again, composed as ever. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black card. He tossed it across the table. It slid smoothly and stopped right in front of her. $10,000, he said casually. "Take it and move on. Get yourself a small apartment somewhere. Start over." Chloe laughed again, louder this time. "That's actually generous," she said. "You should be grateful." Elena looked down at the card but didn't touch it. "Is that what you think this is worth?" she asked quietly. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "That's more than what this marriage is worth." There was a long silence. In the far corner of the room, an older man sat quietly. He wore a simple charcoal suit, nothing flashy, nothing that demanded attention. He had been sitting there the entire time, unnoticed, like part of the furniture. But his eyes were sharp. Very sharp. Mr. Miller, the lawyer, sat next to him, nervously adjusting his glasses. He kept glancing at the older man, clearly uncomfortable, but said nothing. Elena finally looked up again. "Are you sure, Marcus?" she asked. "Once I sign, there's no going back." Marcus let out a small laugh. "That's the whole point. You lose everything connected to me," she added. He waved his hand dismissively. "There's nothing to lose." The older man in the corner shifted slightly in his seat. Elena noticed. For just a moment their eyes met. He didn't speak. He didn't move much. But he gave the smallest nod. It was almost invisible. But Elena understood. She reached for the pen. Mr. Miller immediately straightened up, watching closely. His hands were slightly shaking now. "Elena," he said carefully, "you may want to review the documents one more time." "I don't need to," she replied calmly. Marcus rolled his eyes. "Finally. Some sense." Elena placed the tip of the pen on the paper. Her hand didn't tremble. Her breathing didn't change. It was as if she had already made this decision long ago. But before signing, she paused for just a second. "Marcus," she said softly. He looked up, annoyed. "What now?" "I hope one day you understand what you're really giving up." He smirked. "I'm gaining everything." Elena gave a small, almost sad smile. Then she signed. The sound of the pen moving across paper was quiet, but final. Very final. She placed the pen down neatly and slid the papers back toward him. "It's done," she said. Marcus didn't even look at her. He grabbed the papers, satisfied, and stood up. "Good," he said. "That saves me time." Chloe walked over and slipped her arm around him. "Finally," she whispered, loud enough for Elena to hear. As they turned to leave, Marcus glanced toward the older man in the corner for the first time. "Hey," he said casually. "Make sure this place is cleaned up before the next meeting." Mr. Miller froze. The room went completely silent. The older man didn't respond. Marcus didn't wait for an answer. He walked out confidently, Chloe beside him, both laughing as the door closed behind them. The moment they were gone, the energy in the room changed. Mr. Miller let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Elena remained seated for a few seconds, then slowly stood up. She adjusted her sleeve, her expression calm, controlled. The older man finally stood as well. Now the room felt smaller, more serious. "Elena," he said in a deep, steady voice. She turned toward him. "Yes." There was no emotion in her face now. No sadness. No hesitation. Only quiet strength. "Are you ready?" he asked. Elena looked toward the door where Marcus had just walked out. Then she looked back. "Yes," she said. And in that moment, everything had already begun to change. The moment Elena stepped out of that room, the air felt different. Not lighter, just clearer. Like something heavy had finally been removed from her life. Behind her, Mr. Miller rushed out, still holding the signed documents in his trembling hands. Elena," he stuttered, unsure how to address her now. She stopped walking but didn't turn around. "You don't need to worry," she said calmly. "But he doesn't know," Mr. Miller whispered. "He has no idea what he's just done." Elena finally turned slightly, her expression unreadable. "That's exactly why this works." The older man stepped out behind them, his presence quiet but powerful. The hallway seemed to fall silent the moment he appeared. "Prepare everything," he said to Mr. Miller. "Yes, sir," the lawyer replied immediately, almost bowing his head before hurrying away. Elena walked beside the older man toward the exit of the building. Each step felt steady, controlled, like she was stepping into a version of herself she had kept hidden for too long. Outside, the city was alive. Cars moved quickly, people rushed past, and the noise of life continued like nothing had happened. But for Elena, everything had changed. A line of black SUVs was already waiting. Drivers stood beside them, dressed sharply, opening doors the moment they saw her. Marcus had walked out of the same building just minutes earlier, arguing with his phone about surge pricing and complaining about delays. Now, as Elena approached the car, the contrast couldn't have been more clear. She paused for a second before getting in, not because she was unsure, but because she was letting it sink in. That chapter of her life was over. Completely. She stepped into the car. The door closed softly behind her. Inside, everything was quiet. Smooth leather seats, soft lighting, a calm space away from the noise outside. The older man sat across from her. Arthur Sterling. Her father. The man Marcus had just mistaken for a janitor. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Arthur looked at her carefully. "How do you feel?" Elena leaned back slightly. "Free," she said. Arthur nodded slowly, as if that was the only answer that mattered. "You handled it well," he added. "I had time to prepare," she replied. The car began to move. Outside the window, the city lights blurred into long streaks. Arthur studied her for a moment. "You stayed longer than I expected." Elena looked out the window before answering. "I needed to be sure." "About him?" Arthur asked. "No," she said quietly. "About myself." Arthur didn't respond immediately. He understood. Elena had chosen this life once. She had walked away from everything, wealth, power, her family name, just to see if she could build something real. Something honest. And for a while she thought she had. Marcus had been different in the beginning. Charming. Driven. ambitious. But somewhere along the way, ambition turned into arrogance. And love turned into convenience. You built his company, Arthur said after a moment. Elena didn't deny it. I invested when no one else would, she said. Quietly. Through layers. He never knew where the money came from. Arthur's expression darkened slightly. And now? Elena turned her gaze back toward him. Now we take it back. The car ride was silent after that. Not uncomfortable, just focused. By the time they arrived at the estate, the sky had already started to darken. The gates opened slowly, revealing a property that looked more like a private resort than a home. Tall glass windows, perfectly trimmed gardens, and a long driveway leading to a massive entrance. Elena stepped out of the car. She hadn't been here in a long time, but nothing had changed. It was still hers. Inside, staff members greeted her with quiet respect. "Welcome back, Miss Sterling," one of them said. Elena gave a small nod but didn't stop walking. Her heels echoed softly against the marble floors as she made her way upstairs. Everything felt familiar, but she felt different, stronger, more certain. She entered her room and closed the door behind her. For a moment she just stood there. Then she walked to the closet. Inside, rows of elegant clothing waited, designer dresses, tailored suits, everything she had once left behind. Her eyes moved across them slowly. Then she reached for something simple. A beige cardigan. The same kind she used to wear every day. The same kind Marcus used to mock. She held it in her hands for a few seconds, then walked to the trash bin. Without hesitation, she dropped it in. That version of her was gone. Completely. Later that evening, Elena stood in front of a large mirror. A stylist adjusted her hair while another carefully selected jewelry. On the bed behind her lay several dresses, each one more stunning than the last. But her eyes settled on one. A deep midnight blue gown. Elegant. Powerful. Unforgettable. "This one," she said. The stylist smiled. "Perfect choice." As they helped her into the dress, Elena watched her reflection transform. Not into someone new, but into who she had always been. Downstairs, Arthur was already preparing. "Everything is set," he said as she entered. Elena walked toward him, calm and composed. "The gala?" she asked. Arthur nodded. "Tomorrow night. The Grand Regency." Elena's lips curved slightly. Marcus's big night. His engagement celebration. His moment to show the world he had made it. "How fitting," she said quietly. Arthur looked at her. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Elena didn't hesitate this time. "Yes." Because this wasn't just about revenge. It was about balance. About truth. About showing the world exactly who she was, and exactly what Marcus had thrown away. As the night settled in, Elena stood by the window, looking out over the city skyline. The same skyline Marcus dreamed of owning one day. The same skyline he had just insulted without even realizing it. She crossed her arms slowly, a calm expression on her face. But behind it, a storm was coming. And tomorrow night, everything would change. The next evening arrived with a quiet kind of intensity. The Grand Regency Hotel stood glowing under golden lights, its grand entrance covered in red carpet, cameras flashing as luxury cars pulled up one after another. It was the kind of event people talked about for weeks, the engagement gala of Marcus Hale, the rising star of the business world. Inside, everything was perfect. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above a sea of well-dressed guests. Soft music played in the background while waiters moved smoothly through the crowd carrying trays of champagne. Marcus stood at the center of it all, confident, proud, smiling like a man who believed this night was his victory. Chloe stood beside him, her hand wrapped around his arm, showing off a large diamond ring to anyone who would look. She laughed loudly, enjoying the attention, already acting like she owned the place. "This is just the beginning," Marcus said to a group of investors. "After this deal, we're talking global expansion." The investors nodded, impressed. Everything was going exactly how he imagined, until suddenly it wasn't. At the entrance, something shifted. It started small. A quiet murmur. Then silence. One by one, people turned their heads toward the doors. The music seemed to fade. Even Marcus noticed. "What's going on?" he asked, slightly annoyed. But no one answered him, because at that moment the doors opened. Arthur Sterling walked in first. Calm, controlled, powerful. And beside him, Elena. She stepped forward slowly, her midnight blue gown flowing behind her, diamonds catching the light with every movement. Her posture was perfect, her expression calm. But her presence filled the entire room. It wasn't just beauty. It was power. The kind that didn't need to speak to be understood. The crowd instinctively moved aside, creating a path for her without anyone saying a word. Marcus froze. His smile disappeared instantly. For a second, he couldn't even process what he was seeing. "Elena," he said under his breath. Chloe's grip on his arm tightened. How did she even get in here? They watched as Elena and Arthur walked further into the room. Every step felt deliberate. Every second heavier. Marcus quickly recovered, forcing a laugh as he stepped forward. "Wow," he said loudly, trying to regain control. "Didn't expect to see you here." Elena stopped a few steps away from him. She looked at him the same way she had in that boardroom. Calm. Unshaken. "I was invited," she said simply. Marcus frowned. "That's not possible. This is a private event." Arthur stepped forward slightly. "It is," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the entire room. "And you're standing in my hotel." The words hit like a shockwave. The room went completely silent. Marcus blinked. "Your hotel." Arthur looked at him directly now. "The Grand Regency is part of the Sterling Group." A wave of whispers spread through the crowd. Investors began exchanging looks. Everything Marcus had been building his reputation on suddenly felt unstable. Chloe slowly removed her hand from his arm. Marcus forced a smile again, but it was weaker this time. "Okay, even if that's true, it still doesn't explain why she's here." Arthur didn't respond. Instead, he stepped slightly aside, giving Elena the space. And the moment, Elena took one step forward, then another, until she stood directly in front of Marcus. "You said I didn't belong in your world," she said calmly. Marcus didn't speak. "You said I was ordinary, replaceable." Each word was steady, clear, controlled. She looked around the room briefly, at the investors, the guests, the people who had come to celebrate Marcus. Then she looked back at him. "You wanted someone with power, with connections, with influence." She paused, then gave a small, almost ironic smile. "Here I am." The silence in the room became unbearable. Marcus's face had lost all color now. He looked around, searching for support, but all he saw were people watching him, judging him, realizing. "No," he muttered. "This doesn't make sense." Elena tilted her head slightly. "It does. You just never looked closely enough." Arthur stepped in again, his presence now impossible to ignore. "The funding that saved your company 2 years ago," he said. Marcus's eyes widened. "That was us," Arthur continued. "Through private channels. Anonymous investments." Marcus shook his head slowly. No, that's not possible." Elena's voice cut through his denial. "It was me." That was the moment everything broke. You could see it on his face. The realization, the regret, the panic. "You," he whispered. "You were behind everything?" Elena nodded once. "Yes." Marcus took a step back, then another, as if the ground beneath him had suddenly disappeared. Around them, investors started murmuring again. But this time it wasn't admiration. It was concern, doubt, distance. Arthur looked toward them calmly. "As of tonight, all financial support connected to Marcus's company is being withdrawn." That was it. The final blow. One of the investors stepped forward. "Marcus, is this true?" He couldn't answer. Because it was. And everyone could see it. Chloe slowly stepped away from him completely now. "You didn't tell me any of this," she said, her voice cold. Marcus looked at her, desperate. I didn't know. But it didn't matter. She shook her head and walked away. Just like that. The room that once celebrated him turned its back on him. Elena watched it all without emotion. Not satisfaction. Not anger. Just closure. She reached into her small clutch and pulled out something. A black card. The same kind Marcus had thrown at her. She held it out toward him. $10,000, she said. Her voice was calm. But this time it carried something deeper. Consider it a lesson. Marcus stared at the card but didn't take it. His hands were shaking now. His entire world had collapsed in minutes. Elena lowered her hand and placed the card on a nearby table instead. Then she stepped back. Arthur stood beside her once more. It's done, he said quietly. Elena nodded. Yes. Without another word, they turned and walked away. The crowd parted again. But this time it wasn't curiosity. It was respect. Outside, the cool night air felt calm. Peaceful. Very different from the storm inside. Elena paused for a moment before getting into the car. She looked up at the skyline. The same skyline Marcus once dreamed of owning. The same one he lost without ever realizing he had it within reach. 2 years later. Snow fell quietly over a small car lot. Marcus stood outside wearing a thick jacket, trying to warm his hands as he spoke to a customer. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the arrogance. Life had stripped everything down to something simple, real. Later that evening, he sat alone in his small office. In front of him was an envelope. Inside it, a check for $10,000. He stared at it for a long time before finally sealing it. Along with it, a short note. For the lesson. Miles away, in a high-rise office overlooking the city, Elena stood by the window. Her assistant walked in quietly. This just arrived for you. Elena took the envelope, opened it and read the note. For a moment she said nothing. Then she gave a small nod. Donate it, she said, to the scholarship fund. Her assistant smiled. Of course. As Elena turned back toward the window, the city lights reflected in her eyes. Calm, balanced, complete. She didn't win because she destroyed him. She won because she never lost herself. And that was something no one could ever take away.